Well, hi, friends. I am Pastor Michelle from Harmony Creek Church, and I wanted to go ahead and read to you my sermon that I preached this past Sunday. I am really excited and was really excited to preach this past Sunday. I'm always excited to preach, but this past Sunday we had the theme of Star Wars because one of our members, as we continue the You Asked For It / You Paid For It sermons, one of our members bid on me to be able to pick a topic, and his topic was Star Wars, like how to relate it to the Christian message. And so this past Sunday, I dressed up as Princess Leia, and I gave the sermon as Princess Leia. So imagine me with the buns and my hair and wearing a robe. And so let's go ahead and dive into this sermon, shall we? A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was born into empire. An empire in my world is the Galactic Empire, which is a fascist regime that replaced the Galactic Republic in order to establish absolute rule over the galaxy. Now, as I've experienced, empires aren't the best. They don't exercise controls in ways that benefit all people. Now, my empire, this regime, has very questionable values. They assign values to people in a way that makes some people matter more than others. And they claim that's necessary. They claim it keeps people safe. They claim there's no other way. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't seem right, right? Now, something you may not know about me is that when I'm not busy dismantling the empire along with my brother Luke and Han, I love to read. And I recently found a book which detailed some of my own life experiences. It was a book called The Gospel According to Star Wars. And it's written by John C. McDowell. And I liked what he said about the Empire. He says that the Empire is never neutral. He explains that the dark side isn't just simply evil actions, but it's about how power is imagined or used, or rather how it's misused. And trust me when I say that I've met plenty of people who you could say that power has gone right to their heads. You see, in my world, there's something called the dark side and the light side. And the dark side flows from fear, control, and domination. And it promises order while quietly destroying freedom, dignity, and compassion. While the light side, which is used by those who are Jedi masters, right, like Luke, the light side is used for peace and harmony. And maybe you can guess which side is the better side. But it's not always black and white, right? It's not always light side, dark side. Sometimes things are messier than that, right? So our empire is one that the empire is, in my world, is one that I would say uses the dark side. The empire promises peace, but only through domination. The empire says it's about unity, but enforces it through fear. It builds Death Stars, and they call them necessary. Now, there was another book which I read that I really liked, and it was called Othered by Janae Amen. And in this book, she talks about this whole idea of othering. And othering isn't just a personal prejudice. It's a systemic practice that creates insiders and outsiders. To quote her, othering happens when we divide the world into us and them, and then attach value, power, and belonging to one side and not the other. End quote. And it made me think about empires, especially mine, and how they want us, they need us to fear each other. Because guess what? When we're afraid of each other, we're blaming others and not those in power who are doing the actual harm. And as I look around your world, I recognize your empire is still operating in much the same way. Now, speaking of those in power, I want to talk about Darth Vader. Yes, this asthmatic man behind the mask, once known as Anakin, he is pretty bad, right? He's terrifying, right? He's violent, and he enforces the will of the Empire. He has a very dark side. The writer of the Gospel According to Star Wars makes something very clear. Darth Vader is not, as some would have you believe, he is not evil incarnate. He is enslaved by it. I appreciate that the writer points this out because as I've come to see it, Darth Vader, no matter how evil he seems, he isn't the real villain of the story. The real villain is Emperor Palpatine. And I would even go so far as to say the emperor is less a person and more a principle. Evil that is systemic. He's manipulative and parasitic. He's evil that hides behind others. Evil that convinces people they have no choice but to participate in their harmful ways. In a way, the emperor is empire itself. And that's why Darth Vader, has trouble standing up to him. Because he can't do it on his own. Empires don't fall because one person decides to be brave and try to make it fall. No, the empire crumbles when people dare to dream together, emphasis on the word together, and to do the hard work of making some of those dreams come true. Do the hard work of trying to make our planet, our world, a little better than how we found it. And I can't help but think of the great civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I think he knew a thing or two about empires. Although I'm told he's more of a Star Trek fan than a Star Wars fan. But we won't hold that against him. I think we can say, though, that he was someone who boldly went where no one else would go. So during the times of the civil rights movement, there was a thing called segregation that was happening everywhere. There were water fountains, bathrooms, restaurants, places on buses that were set up in a way where one thing would be for white people, one thing for black people. And guess who always got the shorter end of the stick? Sometimes, and I've seen pictures of it, that the water fountains made for white people were these really nice, glorious water fountains, but the water fountains made for the black people were left a lot to be desired. And the same could be said for a lot of other things, right? The bathrooms, I'm assuming, the restaurants, the places on the bus, and we all know Rosa Parks, who refused to stand up. So racial segregation was something that benefited white people by creating structural advantages. Essentially, segregation created better schools for white people, better housing. And so it created this hierarchy, right? Segregation was a system that clearly benefited the powerful people of that time. And this system operated much like the empire of my time. But thank God for people like Dr. King, who, in your world, right, who wasn't afraid to use his influence, his words, his body, his faith, not to dominate, but to resist. He opposed the systems of injustice that hurt the most vulnerable. And he was someone that understood that love and justice were things that went together. A famous philosopher by the name of Cornel West said that justice is what love looks like in public. And boy, did Dr. King love and work for justice. He was very public about that. He was someone who dared to dream and dared to say his dreams out loud. He dared to dream with his eyes wide open. He says that Dr. King reminds us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But it doesn't do this on its own. It bends when everyday people decide to use the force within them for good. And this force that we talk a lot about in my world is everywhere and in everyone, I would say. So I also, in my spare time, read another book called the Bible. And that was an interesting read for sure. Well, in this library of books, there's this guy named Jesus. And I love reading about me. I love reading about him. He was, in my humble opinion, one of the biggest resistors of systems of oppressions of his time, perhaps all time. And I read a story from the Gospel of Luke, not my brother, but I read about a time when Jesus stood up in a synagogue and made his intentions very clear as he read from a scroll. He unrolls the scroll and speaks, and some of what he says is, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor, to let the oppressed go free." Now, some people think that this is like Jesus' mission statement, and maybe it is, but it's more than that. This was ultimate resistance language, right? He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to do these things." Perhaps in my world, it would be like the force is within me to do these things. I like to think this moment in Luke is Jesus' mic drop moment. Going back to the gospel according to Star Wars, the author writes that Jedi spirituality is about alignment rather than domination. It's about surrendering oneself to the force instead of bending it to one's will. And that's exactly what Jesus does. He doesn't seize power in this moment. When tempted to dominate, Jesus instead chooses humanity, or chooses humility, and he also chooses humanity. When faced with the empires of his day, he resists the temptations of the dark side. Dr. King, I think, would call this nonviolent resistance. Dr. King was clear that nonviolent resistance wasn't weakness, it was strength under control. It was choosing the light, even when the dark side looks faster and easier. And sadly, both Dr. King and Jesus were seen as such a threat that they were both killed. Dr. King was shot to death, and Jesus was hung to death on a cross. Empires always try to destroy those who refuse to play by its rules. Our passage from Romans says, don't be conformed to this world. And I think the writer of Romans is just telling us, don't let empire train your instincts. Don't let fear shape your imagination. Don't let the dark side tell you what's realistic. Because there's something called hope, and hope in my story is never found at the center of power, but it's always found on the margins, among rebels, outsiders, and those who choose faithfulness over certainty. My friends, hope gathers in the margins. And I think here at Harmony Creek Church, this church does a wonderful job of providing hope for those on the margins. This church shows up at multiple Pride events each year and proclaims and shows the community that God's love is truly inclusive. You give proof of that. You give a different narrative around Christianity. And people show up and brave the cold, and they march in the MLK March. Dr. King says that faith is taking that first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. And over again, you take the steps of faith, and you do so together. There's much hope to be found here at Harmony. Hope found here there is, as Yoda might say. I think about Dr. King's dreams and Jesus' dreams and our dreams, and we may have a lot of them, and some dreams may feel so far away. But I think a way to keep our dreams alive is by continuing to choose to hope rather than live in despair. Continue to choose to hope even when the outcome's uncertain, even when the outcome is uncertain. We can continue to use the force that is within us for good. Yeah, and yes, the dark side sometimes looks strong and tempting because empire always does. The whole point is that it always looks like something it isn't. It only looks powerful. But I'm here to tell you about another way, and that other way is love. And love, I think, is at the center of the force. And Jesus embodied love. He didn't just welcome the marginalized. He sought to dismantle the systems that marginalized people in the first place. He crossed boundaries where others were told never to cross. He centered people while empire was pushing them to the margins. He built a community where worth was not earned, but it was given freely, without expectations. And Jesus was someone that didn't demand people believe the right things about him or pray the right prayers. Jesus was someone who invited people to follow him, to live and love like him. And following Jesus is one way that we can dismantle the empires and systems of oppression of our time. Because I like to say that Jesus did not come into the world to save us. Jesus came into the world to show us how to save ourselves. The heroes of my resistance are diverse, flawed, unlikely, and underestimated. And I'm sure we could say the same thing about the heroes of your resistance. But our resistance endured because we refused to mirror the same values as the empire. And what are the values? We value unity and harmony. We value diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yes, we value DEI. We value love. We value empathy. We value building a longer table and not a higher fence. We value creating a world that is free from othering. A world where no one is disposable. Resisting empire isn't about tearing things down. It's about building something better, creating something better. A community, a world where margins disappear because belonging is deep and wide. A world where the force of love flows freely without fear, without domination, without exclusion. Just imagine it. Because maybe that's what the resistance is about, refusing to let hate have the final say and having love be what grounds us in all that we do. Friends, this is our most desperate hour. Help me, Harmony Creek Church. You're my only hope. So this is where I would say, I'm not Princess Leia, and I'm Pastor Michelle. And I say, I'm sitting in front of you now as your pastor, acknowledging that our world is not as it should be. But just because our world feels like a big old dumpster fire doesn't mean it has to stay that way. The force, my friends, is truly strong with us. We're the ones who get to decide whether the empires of our day get the final word. We are the ones who choose whether to conform or be transformed. We're the ones who carry the dream and the dreams forward. Because the dreams of liberation, dignity, and beloved community, the dreams of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, those dreams are always going to be stronger than the dark side. And the resistance, my friends, is not just a movie called Star Wars. The resistance is us. The resistance is us. So I say, may the force be with us all. Amen. And God bless you all. May you never forget the force that lies with you.